Good evening, everyone. This is the Short Brother, and today we will be discussing a very controversial topic, which is what class should I go going into BFA? Well, the most common questions that I have been hearing today are what is the best DPS spec to play, what is the best tank spec, and what is the best healing spec to play. Well, to be honest, this question cannot be answered correctly because every person has his own preference and his own passion to play a certain type of classes. For example, myself, I like playing melee classes. I like to be in the fight. I like to play plate melee classes because we can take a hit more than others. And like some people like to play casters, other people like to play healers. It depends on on your play style. Uh, I'm going to give you a general overview over all the classes, and I'm going to say the top three classes in terms of DPS, in terms of heals, and in terms of tanking. In only my opinion, Y- these don't have to be correct, but in my opinion, I believe that every DPS pack has the potential to top the meters. Every healing spec has the potential to top their meters, and every tank spec, if played correctly, can be played can be very useful. But I do believe that there are certain specs, classes and specs, which are easier than others to accomplish such high results. Let us start with the general overview. First, we have the Warrior, a melee DPS spec that has two DPS specs and one tanking spec. The two DPS specs being their arms, carrying a two-handed weapon, and the Fury carrying two-handed weapon. Arms is usually considered early game and Fury late game, since arms can accomplish DPS no matter what stats he has or traits, while Fury is more stat dependent. If you don't have the correct stats, you could mess up your DPS. And the Tank Warrior is really pretty good in this patch because it has recently been buffed in 8.1. Going to the second class, Paladins. Paladins are a hybrid class. They have three specs: the tank spec Protection, their healing spec Holy, and their damage spec, which is Retribution. Let's start with Retribution. Retribution is a very nice spec. They are melee DPS specs. What is unique about Retribution Paladins are their survivability. They have many unique utilities which would make them survive in battle. They have self heals, they have their divine shield, and of course they have that insane burst window when they open their wings, also called as their avenging wrath. Holy Paladins are basically melee healers. Their playstyle is completely different than any other healers. They are characterized in heal that they heal more the more the ally is in melee range of him. The more the ally is close, the more healing he will receive. Plus, they are specialized in spot healing someone. And the Protection Paladin, of course, one of the highest healing rates in the of the tanks. Of course, after the Death Knight and their talents. Going to the third class, Hunters. Hunters are basically a DPS spec class. They have three DPS specs: Marksmanship, Beast Mastery, and Survival Hunter. Survival Hunter being a melee DPS spec, Marksmanship being a ranged spec without using pets, and Beast Mastery mainly focusing on having pets. In Beast Mastery, your damage is going to be from your pets more than from your abilities. Going to the fourth class, rogues. Rogues are usually very handy in many occasions and many instances. They are also a DPS only spec. They have three specs. There's subtlety rogues, assassination rogues, which care for poisons and dotting their enemy, and outlaw rogues, or so-called as combat rogues. They are let's consider rogues that are more accustomed to fighting their opponent head to head instead of sneaking out and attacking them and backstabbing them. The priest spec. Priest have two healing specs and shadow and DPS spec, which is the shadow priest. Shadow priests are have been buffed in 8.1 are and deal decent amount of damage, especially AoE damage. The two other specs for the priest are number one, discipline, which is one of the unusual healing specs, since discipline heals their allies by dealing damage to the enemy, which is considered very good because getting a disciplined priest into the instance is like having an extra half DPS in your fight. And the other spec is Holy Priest. Holy Priest is very nice, has very nice utilities, especially that after he dies, he can still heal his allies for a short period of time. Going for the shamans. Shamans are also a hybrid class. They are known for dealing damage, and they can heal themselves. They are survivable. They have two DPS specs and one healing spec. Healing being the restoration spec, having many different utilities such as Spirit Link, Earthen Wall, and many different utilities as a healer. And shamans can resurrect themselves in case they died. This is very nice about them. The two DPS specs of shamans are elemental and enhancement. Enhancement being the melee spec of enhancement of shamans, having a very nice single target burst ability. Elementals having very nice AoE abilities, and they are considered caster classes. Of course, the shamans have been recently buffed in 8.1, having enhancement being buffed by 5% of all their damage, and resto and elemental having been buffed significantly as well. Mages. Mages are caster classes. If you are the kind of person of standing still and waiting for your spell to cast and dealing immense damage, knowing after your spell will cast you will deal such damage, casters are the way to go, and mages are perfect for casters. They are well known in any MMORPG around the world. In WoW, mages have three specs: Fire, Arcane, Frost. Fire being sustained AoE damage and cleave damage, and they have insane single target. Frost having their burst AoE abilities and their slows, which is very annoying for enemy players if you are willing to enter PvP, and they are very handy in some instances. And Arcane, which is the most common DPS spec of the mage, but surprisingly the least picked in the game. Though Arcane deals decent amount of damage, but Arcane's rotations are kind of hard. Going now to the Warlock spec, also a caster spec, and this is also only DPS spec, having three specs: Demonology, Destruction, and Affliction Warlocks. In my opinion, Warlocks are really powerful dispatch, especially Affliction Warlocks. Affliction being basically single target and dotting the enemy. Their damage purely comes from their damage over time abilities. Destruction are characterized by their bursting abilities. They have many burst abilities that can take down an opponent instantly, such as Chaos Bolt and so on. And Demonology, which is advised to play in M+. Demonology having to do with adds and add rotations and having immense AoE damage. Going to the monk class. Monks are also hybrid classes. They can self-heal themselves as well, even in DPS spec. Monks have three specs: the healing spec, their tank spec, and their DPS spec. DPS being Windwalker, mainly focusing on physically hurting the enemy with their mortal attacks, their kicks, and so on. And they have many utilities such as the Ring of Peace. Going to the healing specs, healing monks are very powerful. They are characterized with the most mobile healers. Monks in general are one of the most mobile classes in the game because of their abilities such as Roll or Chi Torpedo. And healing monks have immense spot healing abilities. The tanks, tank monks are kind of weird to play, because if you compare it to any other tank, it has some weird abilities, such as their stagger, which is characterized by when you take damage, instead of taking it full, it will turn to some kind of dot on yourself where you take the damage little by little over time. That way the healer will have time to heal. Druids. Druids are also hybrid classes, but Druids are the only class that has 4 specs in the game. They have their healing spec, their tank spec, they have a ranged spec, ranged damage spec, and a melee damage spec. Their melee damage spec being Feral Druid, which is really powerful. You can stealth around and attack, have decent AoE damage and physical damage. Your range spec will be the balance spec, where you can turn into a boomkin and deal immense magic damage. You will be considered as a caster, and you will also be handling a lot of dots on the enemy. Your healing spec being the restoration spec, having many abilities such as your tree form, where you can heal immensely your allies, and you have plenty of CC options such as your cyclone and your mass entangle. Uh, Moreover, you have your tanking spec. Druid tanks are currently weak in the expansion. I don't know if they did anything to buff them up in 8.1. But I'm in my opinion, I would prefer that nobody would pick Druid tank for this expansion. Going for the Demon Hunters. Demon Hunters are the newest classes in the game. They are a melee class. They only have two specs, which is their Havoc and Vengeance spec. Havoc being their DPS spec, and Vengeance being the tanking spec. They are one of the most mobile tanks in the game. If you pick the tanking spec, though they are kind of vulnerable to magic damage, but they are very viable in most situations. And the DPS spec for Demon Hunters is very good, and Demon Hunters are generally have generally easy rotations as long as you stick with the correct stats. If you want to deal AoE damage or single target damage, your stats will differ, of course. Now Death Knights. Death Knights, my class. First, you have three specs for this class: your tanking spec and two DPS specs. The first DPS spec, your Frost spec, which I've discussed in my previous video, very powerful bursting abilities. Your Unholy spec, mainly focusing on dotting your enemies and dealing immense damage to them, and your Blood spec, which is your tanking spec. One of the best tanking specs in the game right now. They even had to nerf it in 8.1, nerfing their main ability Bone Storm, nerfing it to only heal you by 15%. But even though they nerfed it, they are still one of the most viable tanks. Now, to pick the best classes, in my opinion, the best DPSs are, first of all, Warlocks come in the first place, especially Affliction Warlocks. Affliction Warlocks rack up immense amount of damage, especially if you do your rotations correctly and if you keep your dots on your enemies. Number two in the DPS, in my opinion, are Hunters. Beast Mastery Hunters are dealing immense amount of damage right now. They are very good, and if played correctly, they can be a great benefit to the party. Number three are Rogues, and especially Assassination Rogues. Assassinations Rogues have been known around all the expansions to be one of the best specs for Rogues. Their dotting abilities, their evasion abilities, and their multi-utilities can help a lot while doing your instance. Now going to the best tanking spec, in my opinion, number one comes the Death Knight. The Blood Death Knight is one of the best tanks in the game. You can check even the M+ logs on Warcraft logs. Every main team has a Death Knight tank in it, because Death Knights are, to be honest, they are overpowered, and they have immense self-healing and self-sustain. Number two comes the Tank Monk. Tank Monks are very good, and in this expansion they are recommended to be played in the new raid, Battle for Dazalor. And they are immensely good dispatch, and they even got a little buff here. Number three, in my opinion, are Demon Hunters, though they are kind of vulnerable to magic damage, but they are very useful, especially while doing a plus. They have immense kiting abilities, and they are very good in that. Now going to the healing specs. Of course, my personal favorite is the Discipline Priest, because you will always have like a half DPS with you on the team. The second healer would be the Resto Druid. Resto Druid have immense healing, and they can help a lot in the raids. They have a lot of powerful abilities such as Flourish and their Tranquility, so they can help in raid-wide healing. And number three comes the Holy Paladin. The Holy Paladin is a must in the fight, because a Holy Paladin can always survive himself. He has a lot of defensives for himself, so you can count on this healer that he won't die, and he can continue healing the raid. He could just Divine Shield himself and heal the raid of any damage that they get. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that I might have helped you. Just a note, remember that each class depends on your attitude. My top classes might not be your top classes because you have a certain attitude in the game. You might pick a different class and top the meters without it. So please keep that in mind. I hope that I have helped you in this video. Please, if you found this in any way helpful, press like and subscribe. You would really be helping me out. Good night.